Welcome, everyone. I'm thrilled to join you today for our first Emerging Economic Research Network event of 2025. I am Rita Aguilar, and I serve as the Executive Vice President of People and Culture here at the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco. EERN, for those of you that may not know, events are opportunities for academics, researchers, technologists who are studying the economic impacts of emerging technologies to exchange ideas, to learn about research from different sectors, and to share insights more broadly with those who are interested in these topics. For us at the Fed, they also provide important insights on how developments from emerging technologies can potentially affect productivity and the labor market, both of which are critical to the Fed's dual mandate of stable prices and full employment. Today's installment of the EERN event series will explore job matching in the age of AI through the lens of Indeed, a global job matching and hiring platform. We are so glad to welcome Svenja Gudell, Chief Economist at Indeed, who will present real-time data from Indeed's hiring lab and discuss her insights on AI-assisted job matching, time to hire, worker productivity, and current labor market trends. She will be joined in conversation by my colleague, Sylvain Leduc, Executive Vice President and Director of Economic Research at the San Francisco Federal Reserve. As head of talent acquisition here at the San Francisco Fed, I can see firsthand how the advances in generative AI look to have a real promising impact on the job matching experience. I can't wait to get us started, so over to you, Sylvain.
And thanks everyone online for joining us today. Svenja.
Thank you so much for having me.
To the San Francisco Fed.
Thank you.
We discovered that we have a few things in common. Actually, you've got some Fed linkages. You started as a research assistant at the New York Fed.
That's right. Best first job, I have to say.
Best first job, right? So we're like our research assistant in the room. Listen to this. And then you went on to do a PhD at the University of Rochester, where I also went. So, we're going to have a great conversation for sure.
It's predetermined.
And then you did your PhD in finance, but you went after that to work at Zillow, which is a little bit unusual as a career path. So I'd like you to start by giving us a little bit of background about your career choices.
Sure. So thank you, first of all, for having me. This is super exciting to me. When I was on the job market, I did all the academic flyouts as well. But what I really started to discover was that I loved having an impact and being able to, in the moment, see how things are moving and having the data, most importantly, to also be able to determine that, right? And I think a lot of researchers, a lot of us have to wait years sometimes for data to come in. You watch an event, and then 2 years later, you're like, I've collected all the data, and then you go through the paper publishing process, and man, it takes a while, it takes a long time. So I was really attracted to being able to say something in the moment with data that was readily available. And of course, companies like Zillow or now Indeed, we generate a whole lot of data as part of the business. And that tells us something, particularly when you have the scale, about the general economy. And that's super cool. And then, I was like when then my mom calls me up and says, listen, I just saw an article in the New York Times that quoted you. And I was like, yes. Thanks, Mom. And so,
you've arrived. Now you can stop that.
at least on that front. But no, so it's that combination of having real-time data and having an immediate ability to say something about it, and then having the impact, because it's really cool. The Fed uses Indeed data, lots of other organizations use Indeed data, and that makes my team and I really proud too. So.
And this is why we wanted to talk to you, because of that, because of all the data you have and perspective on so many dimensions of the labor market. And I really wanted to talk about job matching and the new technology and where that's going. And maybe to give a bit of background for why we're having this discussion, let me just provide a little bit of data here, a little bit of background about where we are. like inflation has really come down a lot over the past two year and a half. Okay, so we were at 7.2% in June 2022, and then it just declined to a little bit above 2% right now. And along the way, unemployment started rising, but it didn't rise that much. It rose, a little bit less than a full percentage point. So kind of relatively minor compared to the big decline in inflation that we've seen. So many people thought the labor market would crumble, maybe would face a recession. We haven't seen this. But this movement, what looks like a mild movement in the unemployment rate kind of masks big changes that we've seen in labor market. And you can see this at looking at quit rates and job openings. So if you look at the end of the chart, you see this big bubble, this big rise in job openings, and people started quitting their job at the same time. So you remember the Great Resignation that we talked about a fair amount during the pandemic and right after. It was kind of this thing. It was kind of a good time. Employers were looking to find workers. Wages were rising, so workers were looking to move, right, if they could. And so this idea, potentially underlying all this big reshuffling in the labor market could have led to better matches. Maybe like you take the time and the opportunity to try something that you really want to do, and maybe you've got more aptitude to do this. And so maybe like there's the quality of matches between employers and workers maybe improves as a result. And what's interesting with this whole period is that productivity growth, so I'm looking at productivity growth here for different period of time. Over the past year and a half about, productivity growth has been really strong. And it follows a period where productivity growth was really, really mild, really kind of not that great. And in fact, now it looks pretty much as strong over the past year and a half or so as it was in the late 90s. Remember, like when people were talking about the technology boom, and at the time, like productivity was really booming. We're kind of at the same level, a little bit less than at the time. And so it's not exactly clear why productivity is really strong right now, but I want to explore the possibility that maybe we have these better matches that maybe contributed a little bit to the increase in productivity growth. So this is why I'd love to get your perspective in what you're doing with AI, GenAI, to maybe improve those match quality. But maybe to start, because Indeed has a lot of data, and I don't think everyone knows like the extent of the data you have. And what I find interesting with that data is that when you look at official data, especially on the labor market, the response rates in surveys that are used to compile that data has really gone down over the years, really quite dramatically. And there's this concern about data accuracy right now because the response rates are so much lower than in the past. And then places like Indeed, you have so much data to bring to bear on kind of the same labor market outcomes, and then you can kind of compare your data to official data. So I'm kind of, maybe we should start with this just to level set before we go into GenAI and match quality.
Yeah, that sounds great. And when I think about Indeed's data, we really sit in an amazing perch because we see millions of job postings. Indeed operates in 62 countries. So we have job postings in 62 countries, some more than others. Of course, we have incredibly good coverage here in the US. And then we also have over 350 million resumes and profiles that users have created with us. And so we see both sides of the marketplace, right? We see the demand side and the supply side. And it's really neat then to be able to sit in the middle and see how they come together. And so we use a lot of our data, obviously I run the hiring lab, and that's Indeed's economic research arm. And with that, we create a lot of research. So if you go to hiringlab.org, you can see a lot of our research. We have a regular labor market update and whatnot. And all of this takes data, right? All of you will know. And so in order to be able to produce all those insights and research, we figured out a system where we really want to have a lot of data products, so off-the-shelf data available to us. And one of those off-the-shelf data products is our job postings index, which is really just an accumulation of all the job postings we have on Indeed in the US, for example. We seasonally adjust it, we clean it up a little bit, we filter it, And that's what you see right here. That's the blue line. That's the Indeed Job Postings Index. And one of the things that's really important to us as we look at our data is, of course, representativeness and making sure that what we're looking at is not just Indeed's business, but actually a representation of what's happening in the US economy. So in order to do that, we benchmark all of our data products as far as possible with government data. So here you see us comparing to JOLTS, again, the corollary to that with job openings. And I like to point out the distinguishing factor here is that not only is our data based on millions of observations, millions of job postings underlie this versus hundreds of thousands for the survey, but also you'll see the little blue dangle at the very end. We're much more timely because at any given point in time, I can tell you what job postings were yesterday, right? Once the day has closed, I can give you that number. So it's an incredibly timely shot at being able to see what's happening in the labor market on the demand side. And as you can see, we track really, really well. So if we index the two of them together, we see that overall the movement's a little more volatile on the JOLT side of things, but overall we move quite nicely together. And that's incredibly powerful to then have something that's actually on the leading edge there to be able to talk about, okay, what happened yesterday, right?
You know, it's fast. Well, first, it's much smoother than the official JOLTS data. And you think that that's just because you have so much more data than goes into JOLTS? Is that the main reason, or?
Yeah, no, certainly. I think just it doesn't spike up and down as much just because it has so many.
And maybe more reassuringly, even though the response rates in official statistics has gone down, then the JOLTS data is maybe not that bad after all. Like
they're doing a pretty good job adjusting right now.
And so you have other measure also, not just job opening, of course.
Correct. Yeah, that's our measure for demand. We have another big one for us is the wage tracker, which we have a slide for as well right here, and that's posted wages. So we go into every single job posting, and we look at, and not all job postings have a salary, of course, listed on them, but we're up to almost 60% in the U.S. having that information, and so. We can then extract, oftentimes it's either a single number, it's a range where we take the midpoint, and then we're able to, by job, keep track of how that is moving over time. And we compare that here to the Atlanta Fed Wage Growth Tracker. There are lots of different wage series out there, but since we're posted wages, we figured we compare relatively well to job switchers, right? Because you'd think that'd be a good set to compare to. And you see we lead by roughly 6 months, which when you start to think about it makes sense because you post the job first and you say, hey, it's going to pay whatever, $80,000, and then someone actually takes that job, right? And that's when it would then show up in the actual job switcher series. The difference being that the Atlanta Fed job switcher series follows a single person, whereas we follow the occupation. So slight differences, but doesn't make a huge impact in the overall series. And then finally, you'll get that trickling down to butts in seat, right? People that haven't switched their job. That is the technical term, of course, for that series. And then you see more muted movements on that front. But it's nice to be able to have that leading indicator for wages as well.
And then you have the same thing for these kind of data internationally also, because you're not only present in the U.S., but you're present in many different countries.
Right.
And so do you see the same trends? So I had a slide on job posting in the U.S. Or quit rates. Do you see the similar patterns internationally?
It depends on the country. And I will say it's really interesting to see, and if you actually pull up the next slide, you'll see that during the initial shock of the pandemic, you see those lines moving much closer together. These are all the different countries. And we can, given that we have millions of observations, we can split this out by sector, by country, by high wage, low wage, you name it, we can kind of parse the data in whichever way we want to. Here, I just go high level by country. And you can see during the initial pandemic shock, everyone moved together quite tightly. You can see, like Germany, for example, didn't have the initial dip down simply because their labor market operates very differently than the U.S. We're much more boom bust in our labor laws, right? And so then you can move closer together. And then since then, the distance has widened, and we've all kind of taken a slightly different path. Most countries still see their job postings being above pre-pandemic levels. So we indexed all of this to 100 in February of 2020, February 1st, 2020. And you can see most of those lines are still above that level. So demand is slightly higher than what it was pre-pandemic, except for the UK. The UK is...
and so then you see the greater range also in different outcomes. Now, in wage growth across country would be...
Exactly.
So it's been slowing here, but different countries...
In different countries. Well, and the interesting thing to consider with wage growth is also, there are lots of, in the UK, for example, a lot of minimum wage laws kind of hitting right now. So that's keeping wages up. Some of those things are happening in other countries as well. So you'll see a slightly different path depending on which country you're in and what's playing out in their economy. So Australia is seeing quite a bit of a strength of, actually we don't have Australia on here, but there's quite a bit of strength in there. The labor markets, the wages are holding up there. So depending on what's kind of playing out in every single market, you will see this mirrored in the data. And it's nice because particularly wage data is, if you look at Europe, it's oftentimes lagged by a quarter. So getting fairly timely wage data is tricky.
Again.
So like the ECB oftentimes will also ask for this data.
That's super useful for us in central banks for sure. Okay, so now we've established like all the extent of your data. So I want to turn back to the main question in job matching. So GenAI, is this used, so what do you do with this at Indeed? Is this used to, because you have this platform, you're making matches between job seekers and firms. How is that being used, if at all?
So I would say AI is used in every aspect of what we do on the product side. So trying to, and we use GenAI for our own research as well. Happy to talk more about that. But on the product side, GenAI and AI in general, in a larger sense, is being used really in every pocket. And we have a bunch of products that, of course, lean in heavily, particularly on the matching side, trying to figure out, what matters for a good match, right? And how can we pull that out of resumes and job postings and then bring them together so that we make matching easier for an employer? Because our hope, of course, is that we believe that everyone deserves a job and should be able to find one, and we are trying to make that process much easier. And
you're doing this at what level? Do you have data on the firm over time or by occupation to try to improve the match quality? So the technology is used at what level to really be effective?
It's actually used at the match level itself. So we go all the way down the funnel, and it depends on, there are different levels. So I always think about this as a funnel, right? At the very high level, you can think about Indeed. We have what we call hosted jobs, where an employer actually comes and says, like, I want to use Indeed to hire this person. They put all the information on Indeed. But we also scrape a bunch of content. So we have job postings that you didn't necessarily, that exist on Indeed, even though you didn't enter them on Indeed, right? So for some of these matches, it's super high level. We don't actually see them being made. We just hosted we just had the job on the side. And then there are different levels in terms of which one of our products you ended up using as you kind of move down the funnel. And then there's a slice of that where we actually see the actual match being made. So you used a bunch of our products, and then we made the match, and the employer has found the right employee. And we use all of that data and we feed it back into our algorithms to be able to then inform the algorithm to hopefully perform better next time around.
And so, so then how do you measure whether the technology is really effective? So what do you look at in terms of metrics?
Yeah, I mean, and there are a bunch of different metrics that you can look at. Some of the things that I look at, particularly because they also matter in terms of analyzing the market overall, is time to hire, right? It's interesting because there's an overall component of how fast does a market move, right? What's urgency in the market like? You can measure that with time to hire. But it's also what technology has been used to make hiring easier, right? Today's hiring is hopefully a lot easier than hiring 10 years ago or 20 years ago, where you had to go into like a classified ad and say, oh, let me read this and call the person up. The world has changed a lot since then. I'm sorry?
A little bit.
Yeah, just a little bit. And so hopefully we've made it a lot faster, and that's how we measure. We look at things like how long does it take to make a match, and we have a stat that says if you're using our smart sourcing product, which is of course based on AI as well, has AI components in it, hiring is 65% faster than not going that route. Or
than with the different technology than you had before.
Exactly. Or we'll look at just time to hire. How many days do you save if you use certain products? We also take a look at how long does a candidate stay on after, how good was that match, right? After they have accepted that offer, what is the separation rate post-hire?
Right.
And so we have a bunch of those metrics that the company measures.
So one question, so people online could ask questions, so they send us questions in advance. One question that comes up often is biases in the algorithm. Just wondering, so how is Indeed trying to make sure that this thing is fair when they attempt to make matches?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, because of course with this technology comes great power, but also great responsibility, right? Because as we all know, data is inherently biased, right? It's because it's the data that currently exists. So when you train new algorithms, they have a potential to be biased, so you have to address that bias. And we take that incredibly seriously. We have a whole team that's dedicated to responsibility in AI, and we have a section of our website that's dedicated to it, so you can read about it. And it's certainly something we take super seriously, and the team will dig in to make sure that we're hopefully avoiding forms of bias.
Right. And so another question I have is, what type of firm is using this? You know, because you're often thinking, like, the hope is that GenAI is going to be like ChatGPT, is easily accessible, is relatively cheap to use maybe. It's going to make it easier for smaller firms to have access to this technology, maybe get productivity growth from those smaller businesses. And so I'm wondering, is this happening here on your platform?
Oh, sure, yeah. And I mean, we have companies of all sizes using Indeed. We have really good coverage. However, there are a lot more small and medium firms than there are large firms, right, in the economy. And so, and oftentimes larger firms have the resources to also have their own processes in place and their own technology, often homegrown, that they use when they hire. And many of them collaborate with Indeed. But of course, smaller and medium-sized firms use the Indeed product and then have access to a lot of this technology that they probably wouldn't have built themselves, right?
And when you have that technology, you talk to those firms in over the phone, or you ask them questions about what they're really looking for. This is all done online. They just send you the description of job posting, and then you deal with this, or
we do both, actually.
Oh, you talk to people.
You can,
That's amazing.
Yeah, no, we have a lot of fantastic customer service reps, and you can call someone up at Indeed and they'll walk you through the whole thing, or you can just do everything online too. Whatever, pick your poison.
Okay. Right. So another question that came up often online, and this in previous events that we've had, the concern about like which occupation are really vulnerable to GenAI. This comes up all the time, and this came up also during the submission of the question we received. So you have a lot of data. You have a research team. You're part of a research group. So what's your take on that? Yeah,
we're veering into my space now. This is, I don't talk about our product that often, so I'm like, yes, let's talk about the research. This is, of course, when ChatGPT hit the scene, right? That was the number one question we got from everyone. It's like, how will this impact the labor market, and what's going to happen? And so the first thing we did was just measuring how many job postings are actually mentioning GenAI. And we have the same, so this is our graph, this is our GenAI tracker. We have the same thing for general AI, and you pull up either one on the site. And here you can see mentions of GenAI. And you can see incredible growth, although I'll say Ireland kind of mutes the growth of everyone else here.
What's up with Ireland?
It's a tech hub.
It's a tech hub.
But the growth here is really quite stark. But notice the y-axis, right? Because we're not even hitting 1%. We're like nowhere near 1% yet. So the number of job postings that mention, and this could be as a creator or a user of GenAI, still remains incredibly small, right? And we'll see this in, for example, marketing jobs. They oftentimes mention users, that they want people to be able to interact and use this technology to be able to incorporate that skill into the job. And then we see it, of course, on the tech side, right? Like the prompt engineers, the large language model engineers, whatever it may be, they show up in here as well. And I will note that Ireland has an incredibly small data set, the number of job postings here, so you see outsized effects on this one. That's why it's such a
It's interesting to see
run-up.
Japan being so relatively mild compared to the other one. You think of Japan as being pretty technologically advanced, and so.
Right, particularly on the like automation robotic front,
Right,
right?
exactly.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think we just ran a survey in collaboration with the Bank of Japan. I don't think it's out yet. I'm not sure. I have to double check, but we did look at, I think there's a lot of interest in GenAI, but the adoption rate is still incredibly low in Japan. So it's again very interesting kind of look by country.
Okay, so you're infiltrating central banks on top of that. So that's terrific. So,
Make it sound so mean.
so just in terms of this this idea of jobs or occupation tasks at risk. So
yeah, so back to the original question, right? How will this change the labor market? We're like, okay, so we figured out how many times this is the least demanded, and then we wanted to know, and really this was an outgrowth of our frustration with the fact that everyone and their mother ran a survey on this, right? And you saw everyone had a survey saying this is what's going to happen with GenAI, and we're all kicking back and thinking, how would you know? Like, what made you think this is really the thing that's going to happen? And so we really wanted to go into the data and figure out, okay, given what we know about GenAI and given what we know about skills and jobs, what could happen here? So we Indeed has a skills taxonomy. We have over 2,800 skills that we have and define and then map to jobs. So we took those 2,800 skills and we actually asked ChatGPT in a very long, over 1,000 word long prompt that we had to really massage quite a bit to get it just right. How good are you, number one, at theoretical knowledge as it pertains to this particular skill? How good are you at problem solving, again, for this particular skill? And then is physical execution needed? Do you need to be there in person? And it turns out GenAI is really good at theoretical knowledge and knows a lot of stuff. Problem solving capabilities, not so great most of the time, like middle of the road. And then, of course, physical execution, some skills really needed it, other skills didn't. So it really depends on the skill. If you're a nurse and you have to take blood, GenAI is not going to do that for you. Other things, GenAI, if you're writing code, perfect. You don't need to be physically there, right? So, and then taking all those three dimensions, we were able to come up with this, which is the replacement potential for all these skills that we then map to jobs. Because as soon as you have the skills, jobs are just a collection of those skills, you're able to then say, okay, who's going to be potentially impacted? Meaning, where is GenAI really good at performing this job? Meaning, are you at risk of losing that job simply because GenAI might take over for you? And the number one takeaway for me was that GenAI is not going to take a single job away, at least in terms of the way it is right now, because it's not good at doing everything, right? It's good at doing certain parts. And we even found that it's not amazing at doing a single skill. It's pretty good at doing a lot of different things, right? And so the really interesting thing for me in this list right here, and we started out with 16 categories or occupations here, is that this list probably looks very different. In fact, it's flipped on its head from the list that you might have expected from an automation list, right? If we looked like 10 years ago, what jobs are impacted by automation? You had the bus drivers or more manual labor type jobs, right? Where you had a lot of automation going in that could take over that particular human job. Here, for the first time ever, I feel like you're seeing an impact on accounting or software development and marketing type jobs.
The more
right?
higher skilled
knowledge worker jobs, right?
What's
And so,
interesting is
yeah.
in marketing also is the idea that the technology can generate ideas, right? Can generate ideas for marketing, for the campaign, that type of thing.
Yeah.
Right. So this
And can generate the actual image, right? As
right,
we've
exactly.
all
So you
seen
can
various
give you
examples
avenue to
of.
pursue. We're getting close to time, unfortunately, but you have fascinating work also on remote work. I know like people have a lot of interest in return to office, and I think like those are part of the job posting, right? They're part of
Yep.
your job description that firms are putting online.
That's right.
And so you have a lot of information about this. You have that information across country even more. So that's
Yeah.
kind of interesting. Maybe we can close on that.
That sounds great, and that's the chart here. We have a remote work tracker, where again, like you said, we can go into the job posting and see who's actually mentioning remote or hybrid work. So this is for remote and hybrid terms, and I think the first time I saw this chart, I was kind of taken aback how low the U.S. sits. That's the like greenish line all the way at the bottom. It used to be at 10% of jobs having some sort of remote hybrid term in them, now down to like 8-ish. I will say the mix of jobs really matters here. So if you hold the mix constant, it hasn't dropped all that much. But a lot of these office type jobs have been reduced in terms of their availability in the market right now. So that's showing up in the overall mix, and therefore this number comes down. But yeah, European countries have a really high level compared to the US of remote workability. And if you ask me, I think remote work is certainly here to stay. And if you go on our site, data.indeed.com, it's our data portal, we show this flip side of this, where we actually have remote searches. So there it's the job seeker actively going and saying, I'm searching for a remote job, and that's still really high. So there's a bit of a mismatch between what's being offered and what job seekers are searching for.
And this you would have at the more disaggregated level also. You could dig in at the level of the city, because that's also important.
Right.
Like
And by
San Francisco,
category, yeah, it's really interesting. Like if you, for example, look at software developers, I think it's like 35% or something like that. It's a lot higher for the types of jobs where you would think it's much more easy to, or much easier to work remotely. So yes, you can break it out by geography, by sector, whatever you're looking at.
This has just been a fascinating look into what your technology, how you're using it. I want to thank you for your time with us today. It's really been invaluable. Our next event is in April. Let me move on to in April 22nd, and my colleague Hu Yu Lee is going to have a conversation with Anton Koronek about AI and its transformative impacts. So I hope you can join us then. Until then, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.